Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Monday, the 22nd of September. I'm Caroline Hepgett in London. Coming up today, the US plans to impose a $100,000 fee on H-1B high-skilled visa applications, causing chaos for firms who rely on global tech talent. The UK, Canada and Australia break with America to formally recognise a Palestinian state. Plus, Putin's secret plan. Bloomberg obtains a cache of documents that exclusively reveal Russia's plans to disrupt the upcoming elections in Moldova. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. New rules are now in effect for those seeking high-skilled US visas. On Friday, the Trump administration imposed a new $100,000 application fee for the widely used H-1B program. The new rules are expected to have a significant impact on Indian nationals, who account for more than 70% of all H-1B visas. As Bloomberg's Newly Purnell reports, the policy will force large outsourcing companies in the country to rethink their business strategies.
There are so many of these workers already in the U.S. and also so many companies, not just big U.S. tech companies, but look, number 2 on the list, we saw TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, India's biggest outsourcing firm by revenue. Every year they want to send lots of people to the U.S. to service clients there. They want to work on site. They need to interface with clients. And so the business models of many of these big Indian IT services firms really depend on these visas.
Bloomberg's Newly Purnell reporting there as the visa announcement sparked chaos in the US tech sector and beyond as companies rushed to warn employees with the visa against foreign travel. On Saturday, a White House official clarified that the fee would only apply to new visa applications, but the uncertainty surrounding the change is prompting firms and immigration lawyers to urge current visa holders to be cautious as the likes of Alphabet, Meta, Apple and others assess the impact on their global recruitment plans. Britain, Canada and Australia now view Palestine as a sovereign state in a sign of the growing international condemnation of Israel. The 3 countries announced the shift yesterday, saying that it was part of a coordinated push for a 2-state solution. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer insists Hamas must have no role in governing, but hopes for lasting peace.
Hamas is a brutal terror organisation. Our call for a genuine 2-state solution is the exact opposite of their hateful vision.
Keir Starmer adds he has a growing horror of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, where Israel is waging war against Hamas. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reacted with fury to the plans, saying that he will retaliate against countries that recognise Palestine, calling it a terror state. France, Belgium and Saudi Arabia are also expected to back Palestinian statehood at an upcoming UN meeting. Well, the UN Security Council meets today at Estonia's request after Russian fighter jets entered its airspace on Friday. The breach marked the 3rd airspace violation of a NATO member just this month, following drone incidents in Poland and Romania. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna said the incursion broke the UN Charter and the Baltic countries' territorial integrity.
This was a very serious violation of the NATO airspace. We are talking about 12 minutes of violation. Last time we saw it just before Estonia joined NATO, it was 2003. But now this is the global situation is totally different. The regional situation is different. Just a couple of days before, we saw a full-scale attack against Poland with 19 drones. And if you put it all in the pattern, so Russia is turning on the heat. Russia is testing more NATO.
So that was the Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna. Tallinn is set to ask NATO allies for extra air defence assistance over the Baltic Sea. Moscow has denied Friday's incursion, saying that its jets were flying a planned route from Karelia, which borders Finland, to the Kaliningrad exclave. Now, separately, the German Air Force said that NATO scrambled 2 Eurofighter jets on Sunday in response to a Russian plane flying over international waters without a flight plan or radio contact. President Donald Trump and top Republicans mourned Charlie Kirk on Sunday, the conservative activist assassinated at a university debate. The president told a crowd of more than 100,000 people that Kirk was a martyr and a hero. The leading lights of the MAGA movement came to the memorial in Phoenix with billionaire Elon Musk sitting next to the president. The service mixed prayers, Christian singers, as well as politics to galvanise young conservatives, and a voter registration drive moved through the rows of people. Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller says that millions will carry on Kirk's legacy.
They cannot imagine what they have awakened. They cannot conceive of the army that they have arisen in all of us.
Miller and other Republican leaders have said without evidence that the shooting was caused by left-wing rhetoric. The administration says that it plans to respond by targeting groups and public figures who disseminate content that they disagree with. Now, President Trump has also suggested that the Murdoch family are involved in the US takeover of TikTok. A deal between the US and China regarding the video sharing app was finalised on Friday. An agreement will be signed in the coming days, according to the White House. Speaking during an interview with Fox News, Donald Trump alluded to Murdoch involvement.
Hate to tell you this, but a man named Lachlan is involved. Do you know who Lachlan is? That's a very unusual name, Lachlan Murdoch.
Mr. Murdoch.
I believe, and you call him, and Rupert is probably going to be in the group. I think they're going to be in the group.
President Trump speaking there. The deal is designed to comply with a bipartisan law that went into effect in January 2025 and will require Chinese parent company ByteDance to divest from TikTok in the US. A person familiar with the matter said that Fox will be involved in the TikTok deal as opposed to the Murdochs individually. Here in the UK, the country's expanding its second largest airport. It is a move designed to bolster growth as government officials look to lift the economy through major infrastructure projects. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has that story.
Late on Sunday evening, Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander announced the decision to greenlight a privately financed second runway at Gatwick. The £2.2 billion project will increase capacity by 80 million passengers a year and about another 100,000 flights, according to the airport. But above all, for the government, is the prospect of growth. Bloomberg understands officials hope the runway could be in use before the time of the next general election, due in 2029. The expansion now enters a period when it could face legal challenges and has already been opposed by environmental groups. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg understands Hong Kong International Airport is considering grounding all passenger flights for 36 hours as the city braces for one of its strongest typhoons in years. We're told that the stoppage would run from 6 p.m. Tuesday local time through to 6 a.m. on Thursday as Super Typhoon Ragasa approaches. A formal announcement is expected later today. Qantas Airways has already posted a notice on its website reflecting those hours, though. If confirmed, it would be the airport's longest suspension in recent history. So that's one to watch out for then today. So those are our top stories for you. Let's look at the markets. Global stocks are trading at record levels. We had the huge spike last week. Asian shares are gaining. Nikkei 225 up by 1.2%. But the Nifty 50 this morning is slightly weaker. You've had a real hit to Indian stocks because of the H-1B visa changes announced by the Trump administration. The dollar this morning is higher, 1/10%. Stock futures for Europe are also just about in the green, although US S&P 500 and Nasdaq futures are down. And looking at 10-year Treasury yields up 1.5 basis points at 4.14. Those are the markets this morning. In a moment, we're going to get into the details then, the latest on the US visa changes, upending the global battle for talent, plus Bloomberg's exclusive reporting on Russia's election interference efforts in Europe. But before we get to those conversations, Do you remember the avocado toast criticism about millennials? It was a whole thing. Young people were blowing what could be, a down payment on a home, went the accusation, by eating expensive brunches out. Well, Bloomberg's Charlie Wells has been writing about this, a really lovely essay that is based on his new book that is out currently, all about millennials, saying that this triggered a real intergenerational battle. The narrative was then reversed as millennials grew older and kind of got the levers of power, and it became boomer bashing instead. Now Charlie writes that the good news is that the story is simply no longer true. Apparently the statistics have suddenly and dramatically changed. Millennials in the US are apparently nearly a third richer than baby boomers were at the same point in their lives. And 55% of them in the US at least do now own a home. So the statistics have changed. Instead of sort of spendthrift millennials, they now actually are very wealthy. But the downside is there is a much bigger gap in terms of wealth between the richest and poorest millennials, and that there is also a bigger gap between races in terms of white millennials twice as likely to own homes as their black peers. A very interesting story and a really great book also by Charlie Wells. I will put a link to it in our show notes. Now, the Trump administration has raised the application fee for H-1B visas to $100,000. The new policy has caused chaos among companies who bring in global talent into the US. Our news desk editor, Jill Deesis, joins me for more on this story. First of all, to people who don't know about this visa scheme, what is the H-1B visa and why has it suddenly been changed by President Trump? What has he announced?
Yes, good morning. So this is a visa program that's been around since 1990. It's primarily used by the tech industry. Leaders within that industry say there's a dearth of professionals with science, math, and computer skills. And we've seen that computer-related occupations have accounted for about 65% of H-1B approvals in 2023. So these are temporary visas. They last as long as 6 years, but they can be extended indefinitely. And this is something that's been used by a lot of companies like Amazon, the largest holder of H-1B visas in the United States. You've also got Microsoft, companies like that have really used this to bring in tech employees. So what the big change is here is that Trump has slapped this $100,000 application fee on this visa program as part of the idea of trying to make sure that more of these jobs are held by U.S. workers rather than foreign workers that are flown in. Just as a comparison, I mean, most visa programs, you're really looking at a cost of about $5,000 to $10,000 US dollars. So, I mean, this is a massive increase in how much it actually costs just to put in an application for this visa.
There was always a split in the MAGA movement, anti-immigration versus Silicon and Tech Valley, Silicon Valley rather, and big tech companies. What does it mean for then these US firms? Are these jobs going to go to more US workers, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, that's the really big question here, right? I mean, particularly as we've seen some within the tech sphere, those like Elon Musk, for example, who have been put in a position of defending these types of visas for the kind of work that it allows their companies to bring in, and how that's sort of split with this very anti-immigration, anti-foreigner movement among a lot of MAGA. I mean, it kind of depends here, right? I think one of the points of confusion that swirled over the weekend that was clarified by the White House eventually on Sunday was the idea that this doesn't actually apply to people that currently hold this visa, or we're putting it up for renewal. So this is new applications only at this point. So maybe that'll alleviate some short-term, sort of pressures on some of these tech companies. But I do think that it raises the specter of what are these companies going to do long-term? I mean, are they actually going to foot the bill for the cost of these application fees? Because this was a really significant way that you were getting some of these foreign-born workers, particularly in India, where there were a lot of tech workers that were taking advantage of these types of visas into the country. So there could be a pretty significant economic impact here.
Yeah, indeed. And I was mentioning that some Indian stocks are down on the back of this announcement. What are the wider implications? I mean, will there be lawsuits again in the US around this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is likely to be some kind of a legal challenge, right? Because as we were talking about earlier, I mean, the typical cost of sponsoring an employee visa in the United States is again, that $5,000 to $10,000 US range. So if you're looking at increasing the application fee, tenfold for some of these visa applications, there is a question of whether that's sort of a legally viable argument. And I think that like many of these really aggressive Trump policies, you may see something like this work its way through the courts. But I think that at least in the short term, when you combine this with a lot of the other Trump administration policies that have been fairly, anti-immigrant, really focused on bringing jobs back to the United States, it does kind of signal a change in how the administration in the United States really thinks about these types of workers.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting. And also in terms of the numbers, just in the full year for 2024, the number of applications for these H-1B visas from India, just over 283,000, more than 46,000 applications from Chinese citizens. So, yeah, it's certainly a very important and interesting story that is affecting a lot of people and caused a lot of chaos over the weekend. Jill, thank you for being with me. Our news desk editor, Jill Desis. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Now, Bloomberg has obtained a haul of documents that reveals Russia's plans to disrupt parliamentary elections in Moldova this weekend. The tactics include a disinformation campaign, recruiting Moldovan voters abroad, and also organising protests. Joining us now is Bloomberg's correspondent at large for Europe, Alberto Nardelli. Alberto, hi. What have you found, what has the team found about the Kremlin's attempts to interfere in Moldova?
We have obtained and reviewed this cache of documents which sets out Russia's plans for this week's elections in Moldova, and they show that since the spring, Russia has put in place a multi-pronged strategy to try and disrupt and undermine the election. There are, broadly speaking, 6 areas to this plan. These include massive disinformation campaign, cyber attacks during and after the election, electoral engineering, which basically means to give voters the impression that there is a competitive contest taking place. But in reality, the goal there is just to try and dilute the vote and undermine support for the governing party. Moscow is also planning to recruit members of the Moldovan diaspora living abroad, including in Russia, to go and vote in polling stations in the EU and elsewhere. You'll recall in the referendum vote that Moldova held last year, voters abroad were critical to that result. So Russia is now trying to disrupt the vote abroad to try and make that closer. There may also be some protest staged at those polling stations. They are using compromising materials to pressure officials in key positions, for example, within the police, security services, or the electoral commission, to try and disrupt the administrative process of the election. And finally, depending on the result, they are looking to stage provocations and protests using criminals, similarly to what they do in their sabotage operations, or young men recruited from sports clubs. And they've allocated significant resource to implementing these plans.
Yeah, that's a long list. I mean, Russia's influence campaigns are well known, but they are constantly evolving. I mean, Moldova is not a huge country, 2.4 million people. What is the EU doing and saying about this? And even why is the EU so important in this?
It is a very small country, but it's positioned between Ukraine, where there's a war going on, and NATO/EU territory. So it's also a pivotal country, and the direction it takes could have significant consequence. The European Union and other countries have highlighted Russian interference before, and there are areas where they are trying to intervene. For example, in terms of disinformation campaign, they try to work with social media companies to try and showcase and remove any content that is shown to be foreign interference or state-backed propaganda. They help countries with to try and defend themselves from cyber attacks. But ultimately, there is not much that they can do in terms of, if you look at some of the elements, such as the protests or trying to pressure local officials or disrupting votes abroad. And we've seen in other countries like Georgia or Romania, where Russian interference has had an impact, because at the end of the day, there is not a lot that these countries can actually do in terms of having a significant impact on these campaigns.
So what does it mean, do you think, then, for President Maya Sandu and her party, the PAS party? I mean, if they don't get a parliamentary majority, there'd be a coalition government from what you've been reporting. What does it mean for her and the political party?
It's very challenging because from a coalition, so if there is an outcome where no one has a majority, then the two main options are a coalition, or you have certain instances where votes just get repeated until there is a clearer outcome. But as I mentioned before, one of the key goals of Russian campaigns is exactly to not have a clear result. So to create chaos and disruption in countries, to create uncertainty. And Russia does this inside Russia too, where you have candidates in elections which are standing against Putin. But in reality, each of these candidates is playing a role, almost as if it were a film where the outcome is known. At the end of the day, the candidate who wins that election is very clear from the beginning. So Moscow's goal isn't necessarily always to have a clear result, but that uncertainty is part of the strategy, because then you can stage protests. Voters start getting uneasy that there is no government, that there's instability, so people start protesting and demonstrating, and that situation, that chaotic scenario is part and integral to Moscow's strategy.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.